Well, that was a long. This happens a real long.
Okay. Just wanted to. Back to your role. Okay. Good shape.
Should we get started?
I don't know whether Bill has I really write any words in.
Yeah. Yeah, I can really profile. Yeah, I think last year was a little.
Hi, is there anybody on the phone?
Oh, you do?
I'm sorry, would you say that again?
David Cawley from BDXD on the phone.
Okay, thank you, David. Anybody else?
My wife does a lot of racing, marathon things for her. Glad to see. Just make another and that came up with John Ray answer. Was he great? He was so outgoing. Such a young guy.
Only David Colley from VEIC. We don't have. Well, that's for a quorum. We don't need a quorum to get the meeting started. To have any votes, right? I know, like approving the agenda, for example.
There you go.
All right. How about yourself?
Good.
How's the sailing been this year? I live vicariously through your
Not as much as I'd like to get out
I
there.
actually got out last weekend. We rented an S2 at this place down on the South River, someplace on the South.
Oh, really?
Yeah. How big is it? It's 32 feet.
Really? Okay.
There were two families, so we went out and just kind of. We never made it to the bay. We just took it out before. So we got almost to the mouth of the bay, and we dropped anchor and swam around for a while. Sunday.
Sunday. Yeah. Okay.
There was a little bit of wind until about 3:30, and then it was dark.
Okay. Yeah.
It was fun. We tacked down the river.
Yeah, I can't remember what day. I went out. I think I went out Saturday. It was actually pretty choppy. I think Sunday was. I think Sunday was not the day. Yeah, I didn't go out Sunday. I went out Saturday. I went out Saturday evening. I took the boat up to Annapolis and then sailed back down to Annapolis at like 6 o'clock or so, and it felt like a storm was coming up. So it was for the bay. There was some good chop.
And traffic, everybody trying to head back to port?
Well, no, I think I was like the last one, with the idea to go out sailing as the sun was setting. So it was.
Maybe we should start. Maybe we could instead of starting at 9:30, start at 10 and go to 12:30, so that people aren't traffic, because that's how it works. I've
lived in DC about 7 years. I worked in Castle for about 4 years. I love Last Time. I live Last Time. I walked around. No, I don't. No, I live at 4. No.
It's so funny because
Right after
I
you
live
work.
around traffic. You're so
It's still far away from China.
I get there all the time. But now 10 minutes away. It's ridiculous. As long as
Well, what do y'all say we get started? No, and we may not get one.
It's a little past that time.
Not to have a meeting, we don't. We don't have to have a quorum to have a meeting.
just to take action.
Just to take action. Yeah.
Past the point of that borderline.
Well, there are a few uncertainties. Donna's not going to make it. John's not going to make it. Joe, we haven't heard from.
He asked for something, though. He asked
He did. That's right.
So far we have 6.
So we just need one more person, really, but we may not get them. But that doesn't mean we can't
Get the brief.
go ahead and get the briefing started, or at least move in that direction.
6, we need 7.
You know, we don't really have any business at this point other than to approve the agenda, and we can just approve it informally, if that's if that's agreeable.
And if you have any discussion, that's all.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have.
Well, somebody could call in, I guess.
Yeah, and maybe someone has since last I checked. So let's go ahead and get started, and then we'll check the phone and run through the agenda. So good morning. We'll bring the meeting to order. We don't have a quorum, so we're just going to proceed without a quorum. Let me check to see if there's anybody on the phone other than David Colley. Okay. So Keith wasn't able to join us this morning, so as vice chair, I'll be sitting in and doing that. That's kind of exciting. No surprise, though, right?
Right.
So let me see. We'll just go around the table then and say hi. Larry Martin for environmental seat, the mayor.
Sandra Madden Fry, People's Council.
Dan Wedderburn, I represent the council chair.
Nicole Snarski for Cassidy Charlie here on behalf of the commercial sectors.
DDOE.
Teresa Lawrence, DDOE. Bernice McIntyre, board member, Washington Gas.
Betty Ann Kane, Public Service Commission.
Hussein Karim, DDOE.
Daniel White, DDOE. Ted Troy DC Sustainable Energy Utility. Marcus Walker, DCSU.
Nicole Ciaronin, OPC.
George Nichols, DCSEU.
Nicole Lawrence, Councilmember, Mary Jane's office.
Ian Cleverton, Public Service Commission.
Steve Soiser, DC Sun.
Anna Green, DCSU. Samuel Bahor, Washington Gas.
Colin Shea, Washington Gas.
Judith Welch, DCSU.
Michael G, DCSU.
Patty Boyd, DCSU.
Rick Flurry, DCSU.
Dion Scenario, OPC.
Marky Shaw, guest of consultation.
John McCarthy, guest of consultation.
Bill Updike, DDOE. Mike Healy, Skyline Innovations, and the Local Solar Energy Industries Association.
Tom Dottie, DDOE Finance.
Neil Payne, DDOE.
Greg Billings, Jerome Page Associate. Tom Page.
Okay, thanks everybody. So we don't have a quorum. We'll just address the agenda. Is there anything else that anyone wants to add to the agenda, or are there any other comments or changes, modifications? Okay, so we'll just proceed with the agenda as it's been printed. First up then is a discussion of the annual report, the advisory board annual report.
Okay, I don't think that there's anything really to discuss per se. We did send out the revised schedule, and unless someone has a change or needs clarification on it, I think we're fine. I can reiterate the dates just to make certain that we're all on the same page, but other than that, I did not receive any comments, so I don't think that there are any problems. But as it is drafted on September 27th, we will get a first draft of each section as we previously assigned them, and OPC will do the collation of that. And October 1, we will get that collated version back to the parties for any additional edits or comments. And we are anticipating something from the SEU by October 22nd. It's going to just be the draft that we can use to incorporate. And then the final draft of the annual report will be submitted to the board on October 25th with the goal of meeting the November 15th deadline. But that may change based upon requests for an extension. That was my understanding. But that's it.
So,
Go
go
We
ahead.
have a board member, a board meeting in October, or we have this one in September. Do we need a board meeting in October to finalize the report or not?
That's a good question.
What do you all think? Maybe it would be better just to have a working meeting to focus on the annual report.
That might be a good idea.
But we have to have a vote.
To approve it,
To approve it.
before submitting it
So
on the
Right.
15th, so
we do it
sometime.
informally or I mean, I know the last time we did it through telephone conference.
Right, which
So we
was
don't
not the
have
most
to do
effective.
it in a meeting, but just
It
something to
needs to
think
be.
about.
Sometime between October 22nd and November 15th, there probably a few
It
days before.
probably would be a good idea to meet,
And maybe
If
we
we
can
have
do
to
it in
approve it.
November. I mean, it doesn't have to be,
Be-
just
right.
approve that week.
maybe November 1st, the first week of November.
Hearings 11:03. That week.
Do you all want to check calendars and try and get a sense of what could work, or should we do a doodle poll since we have so many
let's do a
members?
doodle. Yeah,
Everybody's
let's
not
do
here.
a doodle. Yeah.
Okay, we'll send out a doodle poll. So that'll be a meeting between the 25th and November 5th, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I can tell you now that first week in November is out. We have hearings on the Pepco rate case all week.
Oh, so you do. That's
Yeah.
right.
All week. And that will involve at least some of us.
All right. There was one other matter that I think might have been referenced in this discussion of the annual report, and that was the whole timing of the annual report. I know I have concern that we're doing an annual report before we have all the information that would allow us to make, conclusions of the year. I know in last year's annual report we said, well, this is what we think at this point, but we haven't had the verification report yet. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen the final report from the SEU yet. If the board feels like it's okay to do this kind of interim statement of, well, this is how it looks from, the end of October, the end of the fiscal year, without having had all the analysis that's going to be forthcoming over the next week or two, if the board feels like that's okay and that represents us well enough, then, all well and good. I personally feel, though, that I'd kind of like to have everything and do a complete analysis, even if it's not done until the following April. Now, my question, anyway, before we get into that, let me just see if anyone else has an interest in exploring that at all. Because if there's no other interest in exploring it, I won't pursue it.
I would be interested in knowing, but what would that entail? How would we get to that point? Does that require an amendment to the legislation? Does
Yes.
it require, what exactly does it require? And what would be and that would have to be balanced against the value achieved.
It would require an amendment to legislation. As I recall, the legislation says the report is due to the council 45 days after the end of the fiscal year.
I believe you're right.
And so that's why we get the November 15th date. That is a short time to do it. You don't want to be too far out, but that is a short turnaround time. If the fiscal year ends September 30th, then you're not having all that, so maybe December 31st or something, which would be 90 days.
When do we get
Well, the question is, when would we have the information?
Oh, the information,
that we would need
exactly,
from
right.
the SEU? What are the SEU, the fiscal year and everything is based on? In September 30th, what's a reasonable time? Are there DDOE deadlines where you would have information, where you require reports from them, so that we would have more complete information?
And that's at the end of the year or prior to the end of the year?
When your contract with them runs on a fiscal year basis.
Yes.
So that as soon as reporting requirements,
Yes.
end of year reporting requirements, when is the current contract require a report on the just concluded fiscal year?
October 30th.
October 30th.
Yes.
Okay. So that's
But that's really too late for us to incorporate into our
into the
report.
November 15th. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Maybe
December.
December 31st or just even December 15th. Another.
And how about the EMV? When did we get the EMV report from Tetra Tech?
Right now it's set up for 6 months after the close of the year, so March 31st.
And that may well be too late.
Yeah.
What do y'all think? Here's my big question, actually. So I understand that DDOE effectively has to make a decision about renewing the contract well before October 31st. You can't just wait to the end of the year, obviously. So you've already made your decision by that time. How late would be too late for you to receive the advisory board's report, for you to take it into account in evaluating whether or not you're going to renew the contract in the following year. I'm assuming you're probably making that decision June or July, or maybe no, August would be too late. June or July.
End of July.
So would it be valuable for you to have the advisory board's report after the EM&V report as kind of like a final? People are saying, no, it's too late.
Well, I think that the DDOE has a sense of what the board feels about the contract. We don't have to, the report does not determine our input to DDOE on whether we think the contract is running well. The report is simply a synopsis of what we do to the city council.
Yeah, it's a report to the
So
council.
I don't
Mayor,
think that those two are tied together in my estimation, because if we don't feel as a board that the contract should be continued, we can give that input when it's
At any
given to
time.
DDOE.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and Larry, keep in mind that the EM&V report is for the previous year. So if you file a report in April, it's for the previous
Right.
fiscal
Right,
year, not the
right. Well, that's the whole.
ongoing, well,
that's the
not
whole
the
time.
year
Right.
that's
No,
ongoing at that
right,
point.
right.
Yeah,
So-
I would say at the end of the year at the latest, to move the date from November 15th to the end of the year so we could get the SEU's report before we go to the city council, but I don't think going to the next year is good.
We have a quorum now.
We do have a
We do
quorum.
have
Thank you, Joe.
quorum.
Any other thoughts on the subject?
Yeah. I have this question, and I don't know, I don't presume the answer either. What is the value of, what has been the value of our report that goes to the council at the end of the hearing? And what would be the additional value by having this later, which I'm not at all opposed to. You see what I'm getting at?
Mhm.
So I asked that question to people.
I think that that's almost a philosophical question that goes directly to what is the value of the advisory board itself, because the report essentially reflects our assessment and analysis, evaluation of the activities of the SEU. So, I mean, I think it's a real legitimate question. You know, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? You know, but I think that, you know, in terms of the second question, they're two separate questions. The first question is, you know, why are we here? And then the first question is why are we here. The second question is, do we have sufficient information to make the document that we submit complete and, you know, as good as it possibly can be? That's what I think.
One of the difficulties, well, at least historically in the last few years, is that a lot of activity that the SEU engages in occurs in the last several months. That may be the case, this year. Probably not as dramatic. Thank you for the DOE for passing on those reports, the third quarter July reports. But that's the latest that we have as of now, of the July reports. So not knowing what goes on in August and September to kind of see their progress towards targets. As of July, there's significant deficit in some of the targets. I know we're going to be talking about that later. So having that information is valuable for us to know, and maybe having a sense of where they're going to end up, helps. I think it's that. But if the SEU, which they're planning on doing, has a steadier workflow by the end of the year next year, we may be in better shape to assess whether they're on target or not. And along the way, we're asking questions, we're meeting with them, so I think we'll have good enough information to give our opinion and advice, and that's all that we can get.
Larry, now that we have a quorum, perhaps we could take an action on this. I'd like to suggest that we include in our report to the council a request changing the report due date to December 31st, from November, which would be 90 days, which would be 60 days. It would give us time to look at the final report that the SEU has to give to DDOE on October 31st and give us enough time to incorporate that too. In it, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have to turn it around in 15 days. If DDOE is getting the report on October 31st, a month after the end of the fiscal year, then we could, we'd be working on it, we would have a little more time to incorporate that, the year end, and the report the council would be getting, I would think, useful to the council. They'd be getting a more complete report. And it would comport with, if they're asking DOE and an oversight here, what's your year-end report? It would correspond with the same information, at least, that we were basing our report on. So it was
I
suggested.
think still, to what end is really...
Well, just so that we have a complete report, and so that we're
Which is
not
just-
saying, we're not writing a report saying, well, this is what we know as of July 31st.
Right, we
You
would
know.
get the 2 additional months, the August and September reports from the DDOE by
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah.
And we'd have the SEU's final report. But we wouldn't have the
No, but that's a
We
different-
don't need that. I would agree that it's December 31st would give us the time to have at least a full year's worth of, as opposed to right now, it's November 15th, and we're always sort of guessing at that last month.
So I'll accept that as a motion.
Second.
And just for clarity, we're asking to push it back 30 days, or
45.
or to the end of the year.
To the end of the year.
All right, December
December
31st.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? So it's passed by consensus. That'll just be a request, a recommendation in our
The council.
annual report this year. Okay, great.
Would it be, do we need to pursue what other, I guess, the logistics of doing that? Because I don't know if just a request in a report is sufficient to get it before the council or the committee that would have to take action. I don't know if we need to do something else in addition to that.
Draft line.
Right, just something and propose it and submit it
Two-word
to the committee.
amendment, change November 15th to December 31st. Yeah.
Just to elevate it.
Yeah.
We could perhaps bring it to council staff
Right.
attention.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
That's true.
Well, the deadline is in the law, so.
Yeah.
Right, they would have
They
to
have to
amend the
change the
law.
law. Yeah.
We have a few other ideas too when it came to changing the laws. Anyway, it's for another time. Should we adopt the agenda by acclamation? Anything else we want to add to it? There are a couple minor items that I'd like to discuss, but maybe we can talk about them within the benchmark conversation. If not, we'll just leave it for new matters at the end. Anything else? Okay, so all in favor of the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. So we passed the agenda. So next up is the report on the performance benchmarks with Jerome Page and Associates. Welcome back.
Well, thank you for having us back. Again, I'm Jerome Page, and this is my associate, Greg Billings. Bo is not with us because it's his wedding anniversary. He chose to be with his wife
Smart man,
instead of with us. So I can't even say he's here in spirit. Plus, it's his first anniversary as an empty nester, so we might not ever see him again. But again, so thank you very much. We really appreciate it. The feedback we got at the last board meeting was very useful. Helped sharpen our thinking. We had further discussions with some folks, additional discussions with the DCSEU. We weren't able to, because of scheduling issues, talk to Donna Cooper and representatives from PEPCO prior to our last presentation, but we subsequently had met with Donna Cooper and some folks from PEPCO, and we've integrated some of their thinking into the report. And needless to say, we've been in conversations with staff at DDOE. So what we'd like to do is to give you a summary of our thinking today with some of our recommendations. And while they're pretty close, they're not necessarily written in stone. If any discussions come out today to modify those, we'll be glad to entertain any recommendations. Again, and I think most of you were, or at least the board members, were sent the presentation yesterday, after 5 or something like that. So what we're here is to present our recommendations and to get your views. again, as we talk about the benchmarks, a couple ways to think about them is the benchmarks as goals that are established by the legislation. And our scope of work was to analyze the benchmarks. Generally speaking, and as we've talked about, and as we will talk about today, we make a distinction between the benchmarks and the targets. In general agreement, there's no disagreement about the goals. Most of the discussion is around the targets. And so most of our discussion today will be about the targets themselves. So we're to evaluate an evaluation of the benchmarks, an update of the benchmarks, and a proposed bonus penalty scheme. And just as a reminder, we're not here to evaluate the SEU. That's outside of the scope of our work. So our approach that we took into account the goals of the DCSEU. And so we talked about trade-offs and constraints, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more today as we talk about things. As indicated, we held discussions with DDOE, with GCSU, PSC, OPC, Washington Gas, PEPCO, Tetra Tech, DC SEU advisory board members. And we were tasked to review 6 other SEUs, and we'll talk about our findings from that and to formulate our own independent views. So one difference in terms of terminology today, as opposed to last time we talked, instead of talking about constraints, we divided these and we talked about relevant district-wide features. And these are features that are basically assigned by law. The 35% CVE requirement, the living wage requirement, the fact that the DCSEU or VEIC has an annual contract, and the prohibition of SETF funds used for leveraging. So these are features that are there, that are part of the legal context, and those are givens that we just have to operate within.
Can I just clarify?
Sure.
Leveraging meaning to be used to say as a loan loss reserve or as equity against debt leverage, but it can be used for market leverage. For example, it can be used as an incentive, as it is, for market participants to put their own money in. So you can leverage the money.
If it's within the fiscal year. Yeah, yes, but you're absolutely correct. The market leveraging, if it's within the fiscal year, the funds can be used for that. But for loan loss reserves and for...
I just want to make that.
That's a good clarification there. Okay. Our criteria for reasonableness include the purpose, definitional clarity, measurement, attainability, to the extent that it can be attained, the yield effectiveness, and the use by other SEUs or energy programs. This is a little graphic to try to kind of understand where we're going. We have the desired objectives of the Act, which we talk broadly about energy efficiency, renewable energy, and social equity, economic development. So those are then we have the benchmarks, and we have the internal trade-offs and the external constraints. That will lead us to the actual objectives, and then we can look at the reasonableness of the benchmarks overall. Any questions on that slide? Okay. So as we look at the criteria, we want to look at the benchmarks as a whole. And the point here is that we have to consider 2 relationships. There's a physical relationship between the different benchmarks, and that's the relationships related to yields and the effects on yields, and then the financial implications of each of the benchmarks. If you have 35% of the money, or 25% of the money, 30% of the money set aside for low-income housing, that's going to affect the financial flows of the organization. So we talk about these physical relationships and these financial implications. So the criteria for the benchmarks we grouped into 3 groups. One is the DC specific, the second group is the purpose and specification, and 3 is the attainability. The DC specific, so what are the views of the major stakeholders about the benchmarks? And again, we got those views from interviews with various constituency. Our purpose and specification. Is the purpose of the benchmark still valid? And is it defined clearly? And then attainability. And the attainability focuses on the targets, and then what are the major external barriers to meeting the targets, and then what has been the other experience of jurisdictions. So in looking at the sort of financial flows and things, just a way to grasp that, we have three sort of constraining factors at the top. The cost of renewable energies, the green jobs requirement, and the 30% low income requirement. The cost of the funds related to those limits the ability to increase yields, specifically on benchmark 3 and 5, which then leads to the constraint on the ability to reach benchmark number 1, which is the key benchmark for the SEU. You can see here we try to show some of the budgetary trade-offs, and we've got arrows going back and forth. Benchmark 1 depends on benchmark 2. It also depends on benchmark 4. Benchmark 6 is influenced by, if you do work at benchmark 4 and benchmark 2, you're going to increase green jobs, but the green jobs requirement also reduces or has some constraints on your ability to do renewables and low income. And we see that the renewables and low income requirements, they may often clash as well in terms of trade-offs. So what we find is that if we look at all the various trade-offs, and we get into some circular reasoning, what comes first. And we've had several conversations with the DCSEU, and they've got some fancy graphs with pluses and minuses and some stuff going all over the place. So, but this is a way to kind of lay that out, is that we can get caught up in an infinite loop about what should we do first. And so the next slide attempts to, what we're using a technical term, linearize the relationships, and basically says if we can set benchmark number 1 correctly, then we can reduce the impact of the constraints of the other benchmarks. So if we re-specify the targets for 4, we reset the targets for 6, or reset the targets for 2, then this is going to help the spending flows in such a way that it's possible to get projects that increase yields, which in turn will lead to increased energy savings per dollar overall. And so if we get benchmark 1 right, then we recognize the effects of the other benchmarks on benchmark 1, and if we reset benchmark 1, we can partly reduce the effects of those constraints. And so that's what this logic flow model tries to do. So where do we begin?
Jerome?
Yes, sure.
Stopping you just because I'm a little confused.
That's all right.
So this logic flow suggests that we change or adjust benchmark 1.
Right.
And that.
Well, let me put it this way. Let me rephrase it more generally. If you specify benchmark 1 correctly, you can then ameliorate some of the effects of the other constraints.
Okay, so just to continue the question.
Sure, that's fine.
So it's currently set at a 1% reduction. Are you suggesting that it be less than that?
Can we wait till I come to my recommendation?
Okay. All right. But that's the logic. That's what we're talking about. Okay.
Yes, Dan.
Jerome, my question is that these, I forget what words you used on the 3 on the left, that in effect reduce.
These are constraints.
Yeah, the constraints, these so-called constraints. I'd like to know the extent of those constraints as compared to those of the other benchmarks, and if they can be quantified. I mean, I'm concerned about reducing.
Okay, Dan. Let's wait to the recommendation discussion.
All right.
Okay.
You get my point.
Yeah. Let's
Just one real quick thing. I mean, I think that, and you may have addressed this earlier, I'm sort of not following it. I mean, some of the constraints beyond the target constraints is the inability to leverage the funds, not market leverage, but financial leverage.
Right.
And the year-to-year.
Right.
So that wasn't part of your assignment. I know that was part of something that we were looking at in the Structured Finance Subcommittee. Have we as a board pursued that further? In other words, perhaps thought about what can we recommend so that those two constraints may be on the table, and therefore perhaps allowing some of these objectives to be met. And again, I apologize. I was not here in June, or no, I was on vacation. But that's something that
We really haven't. We've kind of been waiting to get this input.
Okay. But this input is assuming that those given, unless you guys analyze that.
Well, we did not analyze.
Yeah, okay.
We did not analyze the effects of changing the leveraging constraint.
And the multi-year.
Okay,
thank you.
But it's widely assumed and widely shared, I should say, that in talking to Tetra Tech and in talking to others, is that the DCSU is constrained by not being able to do multi-year projects.
And the leverage piece, doing loan on reserves. I mean, it could be a very different discussion on targets.
Right.
If the SETF funds were viewed as precious equity to be a market catalyst, not just with financial leverage, but also with market leverage.
Right.
And we wouldn't have to be lowering targets. And this is something that we've been discussing for a number of years here as a board. And it just seems like I personally feel that we should look at that and make some recommendations and understand what that means. I understand that's not an easy or quick sort of solution, but we've been talking about it for a while, myself included. I'm putting myself in that boat.
Well, Joe, keep in mind, it's the SETF funds that can't be leveraged.
No, I understand that, but if the SETF did not flow through the district treasury, but set up as a separate trust, it could.
Right, but
Okay. And then it would
other funds can be leveraged. It's not the SETF funds.
Which is the majority? Unless I'm mistaken, the SETF funds, unless you get some foundation money and so forth, is almost 100% of what you used to function, correct?
That's correct, with the exception of the Federal Home Loan Bank money.
That's correct, that $1 million.
And it's the SETF funds that come from the ratepayers.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Okay. So where do we begin our discussion? Well, these are the current share of compensation, at-risk compensation that are in place now. So we start with green jobs, since that's 25%, then we move to, which is benchmark 6, then we move to benchmark 4, which is 20%, benchmark 5 is 10, benchmark 2 is 10, and benchmark 3 is 5. And then benchmark 30 we put at the bottom for our linear flow, is that as we address the 5 previous benchmarks, then that flows into benchmark number 1. So that's the order of our discussion here. Okay. So what are our evaluation results? For benchmark 6, the purpose is valid. Everybody we talk to agrees that this benchmark is critically important. Keep in mind that no other SEU has an explicit green jobs goal. And I'll pause here. While we've looked at other SEUs, of the 5 we've been able to talk to folks about, while we're looking at them, everybody's looking to us to say, those guys over in D.C. really are doing a great job. We want to be more like them. And we're looking at the other SEUs. So we want to be more like them. So talk about circularity. So something like out of an O. Henry short story.
These are not easy.
Wait, what?
I mean, these are difficult. These are complicated vehicles. It's not a...
Yeah, no, and they're relatively new vehicles. Right. So while the people believe that there's general consensus that the benchmark is valid, there are some challenges in terms of measuring that benchmark. One is that the DCSU creates jobs in a number of ways. Their jobs, so to say, at headquarters at 80 M Street. Their jobs with their independent implementing contractors, and their jobs with the custom work subcontractors. And the question is, how do you capture all that work created, and how do you report on that? And there's been a lot of discussion, and we went through a lot of discussion at the last board member meeting with Joe and others, talking about some of the challenges that contractors have meeting the paperwork requirements and the compliance requirements of the DCSU. So there's the general consensus that there are some green job work hours that are being created but not being measured. And currently, we use the 2080 work hours to translate into one full-time FTE, and there's some sense that that's unrealistic, particularly for the type of work, the contracting work in which the SEU engages. Our evaluation of the low-income housing benchmark, again, the purpose is valid. There's a unanimous sense that this is critically important. There are no significant lessons from other SEUs. Gregory, which is the SEU that set up a special, or which state set up a special?
Oregon.
Oregon, you want to describe that?
Yeah, Oregon, the Energy Trust of Oregon has an entity, well, they focus solely on energy efficiency. They've also assigned an organization to fund low-income efficiency efforts, as well as another organization that manages the efficiency efforts in schools. So they divide their funding into three types of organization, with the Energy Trust of Oregon receiving the vast majority of the funds.
And how is that?
75%.
How is that funded? Through ratepayers also?
Yes.
All three entities?
Yes.
Do you have the name of the three entities?
I have to research that for you. Okay.
We can provide you, Joe, with the link to that.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, but that's not a problem. Again, some concerns here is that while everybody agrees that there should be spending on the low-income housing, there is some sense that whether or not there was assurance that they were getting good yields in terms of the energy savings. That was one concern. And the other concern was the using solar PV on low-income housing because of the high cost as well as the low yield. So these were some of the concerns that have been raised about this particular benchmark.
Joe, do you have some numbers that go behind that conclusion on the solar? That solar PV on low-income housing is high cost as well as low yield? Given that the cost of solar is coming way down, the cost of the panels, etc., and given when you talk low yield, are you talking about that particular location, the savings on the electric bill that the low-income occupant would be paying? Or the multifamily, the landlord, or the building owner, or the co-op, whatever it is. Did you look at the implications, though, for meeting the district's solar RPS requirement, the in-district?
No, we recognize that that's, and we'll get to that partly in the recommendation as well. We recognize that there is a goal for the RPS
requirement
as the
legal requirement.
Right. So that's one of those trade-offs. So right now, according to the data in the Tetra Tech report, there's a 70% difference in yield in low-income housing versus non-low-income housing, and a lot of that is due to the use of solar PV in the projects, in the installations. So we have some data to share that with you as well.
I'd like to see that.
Okay, all right. Okay, benchmark 5, the largest users. Now, this one is, everybody said that this is a kind of a given. If you don't work with the largest user, how are you going to get the real energy savings? But currently, there's no current definition of this target. There seem to be a lot of data issues in terms of defining largest users. In our conversations with PEPCO on the phone, Donna and her colleagues, we talked about that and keep running up against, obviously, the privacy issue. But the general consensus that if you couldn't talk about, you couldn't identify individuals, but you could talk about the set of I think they said there are 1,000 customers in the GT class that would kind of constitute the largest users. You get some aggregate information. The DCSEU has done a report on the largest users, and we'll talk about that as we get into our recommendations. No other jurisdiction has explicitly targeted the largest users by statute. And a lot of people see that it's not important necessarily to have a target because the DCSU has to work with the largest users anyway. So we'll talk about that in the recommendation. That last sentence there is on the wrong slide. It's been on the previous slide. So in my haste to get things done. So benchmark number 2, renewable energy. This gets back to Chairman Kane, the district's commitment to renewables. So there's a recognized commitment to renewables in the district. Here, some of the issues is whether or not the stakeholders thought it was rather unclear whether the DCU can lead in this, given its limited budget. It could obviously play a supporting role. And also, the target is currently defined in terms of reduction in cost of the installation supported by the DCSEU. So we say that since cost is principally outside the control of the DCSEU, using that as a way to set a target, we might want to revisit that. And then this last point, it's not 5 of the 6 SEUs have a renewable energy as a significant component. Gregory, you want to?
Yeah, 3 of the SEUs have a renewable energy as a significant component. That's Energy Trust of Oregon, New Jersey Clean Energy, as well as Energize Delaware.
So you want to give those again?
Energize Delaware, Energy Trust of Oregon, and New Jersey Clean Energy.
So it's only 3, not
Only 3 of the 5 have. And originally, the Energy Trust of Oregon had a very large commitment. However, I think the PUC actually restricted their component to less than 20 megawatts and pretty much imposed upon the utilities to implement renewable solutions.
All right, so now we get to benchmark 3, peak demand. Again, while the purpose is valid, there was some discussion among stakeholders about whether or not, again, whether the DCSEU should be playing a lead role or supporting role here. And since there was a sense that the PEPCO should take the lead and DC to play a supporting role, particularly since PEPCO has invested in the smart grid, and PEPCO claims for the smart grid that it will reduce peak electricity demand and once dynamic pricing and demand response are introduced. So there is a mechanism to talk about the reduction in peak demand along with the other programs that PEPCO is engaging in. So the current benchmark target is defined in terms of peak reduction, in terms of megawatt hours from the activities of the DCSU. And we feel that the current definition of the target is appropriate.
Jerome,
Yes.
back on that.
Sure.
On peak demand, it's actually the retail suppliers in the commercial market that are taking the lead on that.
Correct.
Not, the load that is under the standard offer service it's less than 30% of the load, but it's the retail suppliers who are serving the large commercial customers who already have variable pricing in effect,
Right.
who are taking the lead in that, as well as PEPCO's direct load control program for air conditioning, for residential
Right,
single
right.
meter air conditioning, which is still a very small part
Right.
of it. So while the smart grid facilitates, or the smart meters, the collecting of information useful to the retail suppliers, it's really those large commercial
Right. That's
competitive suppliers who are in the position to make the difference.
Correct. Yeah,
But-
we'll clarify.
But I
That's-
think your general conclusion, I would agree with, that it's the market and the industry that's going to take the lead in there and really make the difference,
Right,
not
right.
the SEU.
But not
And I think-
necessarily
Go ahead.
Pepco.
Not necessarily, well,
As
not
based on this.
necessarily through the distribution system or through the standard, not necessarily Pepco. It's really the whole industry there.
Right,
It's the big ones. I mean, there are at least one, careful about confidential information, there's at least one retail supplier that is actually selling more electricity in terms of megawatts than Pepco is.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, but the notion here is...
Is that it's the industry.
It's the industry
Yeah.
that's pushing it, and that the large commercial users are, basically cut their deals with the energy
Right.
suppliers.
Exactly.
And-
And the what are they called?
The AES, alternative, they're not alternative.
Not the retail suppliers, the aggregators and the guys who... ESCOs, yes, the ESCOs, thank you. The service providers, yeah, they're the ones who are really doing it.
Right. So the key here is that with all that going on, what responsibilities should the DCSEU have in that? So benchmark number one, we see this benchmark as the key benchmark for the DCSEU. The idea of a single target for energy has broad support. Our discussions with PEPCO may recommend retaining separate, but the PEPCO recommends retaining separate targets for electricity and gas, and we can, unfortunately, Donna couldn't be here today, but we'll try to kind of talk about what that means when we get into the recommendations. So that this benchmark is important too, because energy efficiency is critical to it's also critical to the other SEUs. As we mentioned, the target is currently defined separately for electricity and natural gas, and the ratepayers provide funds, 80% for electricity and 20% for gas. So, any questions? So, what are our recommendations? Okay. For the green jobs, our recommendation is to maintain the target values. But we need to provide information on all jobs created, and this is something that's specified in the contract. That would be sort of jobs in DC and whatever spending that the SCU engages in. We do suggest some changes, that we make a separation of what we call field jobs and office jobs. Office jobs would be some of those jobs at 80 M Street. And field jobs would be those jobs related to implementing contractors and subcontractors. And we would want to be able to count those field jobs more accurately. We'd also want to use a lower FTE variable other than the 2080. And we have here used one FTE at 1920, but in our discussions, got some information a day or two ago from DCSEU that the VEIC model is to use, Ted, can you your number?
The exact number? We work a 37.5-hour work week, and I can multiply it out real fast if you give me...
1950?
Sounds good.
Yeah, all right. So we would recommend whatever, I think the recommendation will kind of come in, so whatever VEIC uses at corporate, say, that they should use the same conversion factor here locally. And so,
But
yes.
you're talking about a difference in jobs out in the field, contractors, installers,
Right.
who, I don't know what their industry standard is there.
We work 40 hours a week.
But our 2080 includes vacation time too, and holidays and all of that. And in many of those kinds of jobs, you don't get vacation, you don't get paid for holidays, you get paid when you work. Right?
Actually, I pay.
Depends.
I pay off
You
for
do. I'm not talking about
holidays
you
except for
personally.
Columbus Day, 'cause I don't understand Columbus.
But a lot of those other kinds of jobs that are created, you don't get you don't get the vacation.
But we should take into consideration whether it should be lower than 28.
Yeah, I
It should be lower than 20.
The 100, does that come into DC requirements? I know there was a specific agency that worked with employees, so I'm just wondering, there's no law or anything that requires that use of 28 hours?
Yeah, 2080 is 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year.
So there wasn't any reason why it was set to be different?
Minus vacations
No.
and
No, no,
holidays.
it includes vacation.
Includes vacation.
The 2080 includes the.
Yeah, it
And the 1950 does not.
Oh, okay, so that it doesn't include.
And the 1950 does not include vacations.
No, the 1950
He
is.
is based at 37 and a half hour
uses,
week.
And that 1950, I think, includes up to 30 days of vacation time, so
But it's based upon a 37-hour work week.
I think up to 30 days you can have.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations don't break it into vacation and sick time. They just give you leave, and you use the leave however you want. So.
Okay, and so the result of that, what would be the impact of doing it that way?
Well, if you lowered it from 2080, then the DC SEU would get credit for more jobs created. That's the implication.
And so you change field jobs based on work done and capped hourly compensation. Is that essentially, is that saying that instead of trying to count hours, we're going to ascribe hours to accomplished work? Like if you change out a hot water heater, that's going to get so many hours, and we're not going to worry about having somebody report their employee worked this many hours, and they live, in Northeast and all that kind of stuff.
Car repair shop, it's 2 hours.
But you would, if you're moving away from the hours, we need some way to not leave it open ended.
Agreed.
Right.
So you're talking about a formulaic approach based on tasks.
Say it again.
A formulaic approach
Yes,
based on tasks performed.
Right. That would be.
Yeah, I mean, I would be in favor.
That would cut your reporting requirements, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'll repeat this. The current compliance has, what it's doing is eliminating competition and access for the smaller jobs. The ones, so we're not really getting to all of DC. So we just finished a project called Neighborhood Pharmacy, and the compliance for that job, which was $2,300, was the same, if not more, just because of some new wrinkles, than a Howard University dorm that was $100,000 or $200,000. And so if we can ascribe tasks, and the amount of hours, opportunity cost of my office manager having to go back and input all this information, it's really onerous. I can tell you that contractors are just shying away from this kind of work. So a lot of the cities, and so the SEU spent a ton of money last year aggregating customers, the smaller to mid-sized customers, under 300 fixtures from the T12 to TA program. But we're not getting as much penetration, I'm thinking, because you don't have as many people interested, because no one wants to do it. You lose money.
Right.
You lose money at it. So if someone were to say, okay, for that time, my company might take 50 hours, another company might take 2, but there's an industry standard for the number of fixtures that you have. It's fairly simple, 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and you just ascribe the hours to that and move on.
So, but I mean, you say, quote, it's simple, but then we recognize that there's some certain simplicity in it. But from an EM and V perspective, we have to make sure that all the protocols are fully specified and so forth.
Well, from EM and V, I mean, you still want to check that you're using DC residents. You still want to make sure that you're paying the appropriate wages, so you can get that information.
Right.
But the level of detail to go in for each individual person these things should flow much more smoothly. The turnaround for a project like this has been 4 weeks, 3 weeks. By the time things have got to shorten and make it more market ready in order for things to really take off. The SEU is not the end-all be-all of energy efficiency or renewable in a district. It is intended to be a market catalyst. And the way it's functioning in many ways, because of some of these requirements, is like a grants program. And I understand you got to dot your I's and cross your T's when you're spending other people's money,
right.
My money, for example.
Right.
But we've got to make some recommendations and changes to make this more market-oriented, in my opinion. And I think that's a good recommendation. I don't have the specifics of it, but I think it makes sense to me.
In Joe, you know, we would love to get some further understanding on that because from our standpoint, all requirements are simply the payrolls that you would do at the end of the week or every 2 weeks when you pay your staff, you know, whether you had 4 or 5 employees and they work 30 or 40 hours. That is simply what we collect. So when we get into the discussions on the compliance piece around the green jobs, you know, we would really like to understand, are there other layers involved in this process that we're not aware of that makes it, you know, difficult for you guys to comply with? Because for us, it's, you know, even a pay register that shows the number of hours worked and checks you to a particular employee wouldn't meet our requirement.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't know, Lance, where it goes from, you know, our payroll information through the SEU current compliant. We have to go on the online system and fill out a lot of forms. We use ADP, which is, you know, a fairly professional payroll service, and we use a work management system. So I could print out a time card detail report and a payroll register for each job. Because I have written job costs and just hand it over. But it's not like that. I've got to fill out a ton of forms. I've got to, and oftentimes more than once, in different screens. It is actually not user-friendly. And I don't know why. Maybe it has to be that way. I don't know what your back end is versus what we see. But it becomes one of those, and, I mean, it becomes like, why do they even bother with doing neighborhood pharmacy or you know, these different places, which quite frankly are the ones that can really benefit the most and are going for these. So, I don't know. I'd be more than happy to sit down with anyone, my office manager, my director of operations, and kind of go through it and see what the pitfalls are. But, you know, if it's just simple turning over a payroll register and a time card detail report, I don't have to do any extra work. I just hit print.
But now you have to actually go in and analyze what each employee has done and how much
We have to fill
hours.
out some forms. Not only do we have to fill out a pseudo certified payroll form, which isn't entirely accurate by law, because we do this all the time for the district, but also a monthly report. And we have to go into different screens because each different program tracks the different jobs. So I've got to fill it out on the T12 screen. I've got to fill it out on the low income screen. I've got to fill it out on the home. I'm not sure about the home performance side. I haven't been involved there. But it's quite a bit. And the home performance, you're talking about, you know, jobs that are, not, you know, again, they're not that big. It's just really onerous. I don't think I'm alone in this. Am I?
You're not.
You're
I'm not involved in it, but I've heard the same thing coming from the market.
My HVAC guy told me the same thing. He was
So
still waiting
people are
to get
shying away from doing the work.
reimbursed.
Yeah.
Paperwork being sent in. And,
You know, we've talked about this on a number of occasions. Would this be something that we should have a more in-depth discussion, maybe dedicate a meeting to, or what would be useful to DDOE and the SCU with respect to us convening contractors or helping to advance this issue?
Like it's an IT problem.
I don't want to say
No,
that.
it doesn't
I don't,
sound-
because I don't know. I really don't. I apologize. I'm not more prepared for that. I just know I know it's a lot of steps, and having a formulaic approach. Again, I don't want to sort of. But if you're replacing CFLs and wrapping pipes and doing T12 to TA conversions, these are not.
They're standard.
These are standard things that you can assign a formulaic approach to, and you can do spot audits or end-of-the-year audits to make sure, or monthly audits or something, or we turn in our payroll registers and so forth. I mean, all this stuff, and for most contractors, obviously we make mistakes sometimes, but, you know, it's all above board, it's all there. Payroll is the one thing as a contractor I don't screw with, because I don't want to, you know, I want to make sure all my reports are in quarterly, I mean, in every different jurisdiction, so that's why I went with ADP. So I can, you know, literally just hit, you know, and I pay them a lot of money, so I can just hit print.
There are a lot of industries that use that approach. I mean, just say you take your car, if you unfortunately have an accident, you go to the insurance claims, they say this job will take 2 hours, and we will pay a certain amount of money.
Right.
They also will say if you go to the shop and they want to charge you more, have them call us, and then they'll talk about the difference. So
Even the way the contractors are paid on the lighting efficiency work, for example, is on a per.
Say that again?
Even the way the contractors are paid on the lighting efficiency.
Work,
it is on a per
fixture.
fixture basis. It's not like, you know, we took 8 hours, so therefore pay me hourly. You know, you're paid, you know, 50, 60, 70, 80, whatever amount to replace this fixture. If it's a balance, it's 20. I don't have any specific figures, but
There's a schedule.
it's a schedule, and so that can be translated into time as well.
Yeah, and I think whether we end up with that approach, but that's the general thinking, is that we'd like to move towards something that can also change the conversion factor. So
Just in response to Larry's question, I mean, it seems to me this is something, if everybody is in agreement, that should we have a conversation between DDOE
And some of these
and
office
Joe, and
managers
not
and contractors.
necessarily the board.
All of us,
Because
yeah.
it doesn't really seem to me to rise to
Yeah.
that level. Everybody wants to make it more efficient. Whether you go back to the hour and use this new approach.
see, DDOE has to
Well,
sustain accountability. They have to. DDOE needs a level of comfort that what's reporting is accurate, that it captures everything. And so DDO, just like DCSEU has some requirements, and Joe, you have some requirements, DDOE has to, as we say, if something goes wrong, they're not going to say it was Lance, they're going to say it's the mayor.
No.
I don't want to,
I don't think. I think
But I'm just saying we got to sort through all these and make sure that all parties are in agreement with the way in which we count. And the example we've been given on the energy efficiency side, that there are energy savings protocols that you use, and you estimate a lot of things. So maybe there should be a job verification protocol that's developed, and so that we can begin to address these issues.
And I'm not sure I heard you correctly, Bernice, but I may be wrong. I do think it rises to the level of the board discussion because what I see happening is it's limiting market participation, and so you're not getting as many
I
people
mean, the
involved.
dialogue that we're having right now, it would seem to me the subcommittee that's with DDOE could work at
Just
coming
fine.
back to the board as opposed to all of us getting involved in the conversation when not all of us have the expertise that you have.
I understand.
Or other people have about that kind of stuff.
I get it. I just want to make it clear, just like when we talk about gas issues, they don't always rise to the level. So anyway, I want.
And the reason I disagree with you is because of the funding. But
This is.
I'm not
We're coming at it from
a
different.
role. I'm just saying I'm not sure that I can add anything of any quality.
I do think that we're getting sufficiently into the weeds on this, that it warrants further discussion in some process, so I'm going to flag this
Right. Keep in mind that
to return
right,
to.
so
It's one of the recommendations.
right. This is
It's an important one.
Right. For this benchmark, this is 25% of the at-risk compensation for DCSEU. So
And this is the main reason I'm assigned to this board by the mayor's office is for economic development and green collar jobs. So I will have probably more to say on this than anything else. So what I want to make sure is that we flag it, but we do actually take action on it, and we also flag other things that have dragged on. This is a significant issue for market development of the SEU.
So I was going to say, maybe to pick up on what we're really talking about, Bernice's policy, at that policy level, that we're moving towards a recommendation that the paperwork be simplified and that we look at some kind of standards and sort of standardized ways of charging and keeping track of certain kinds of jobs.
And the recalculation of the FTE.
Yeah, well, that would be one of the things.
And given that we don't meet very often and we have an annual report that we will be making recommendations in, this might be something that we want to make a major marker on. And we could return to it later on today, but if there's consensus around the table that we need to address this, why don't we just make a motion to make this a recommendation well, essentially, take your recommendation and to work it through to some kind of a
let me just run
reasonable...
through the next slide before you take the motion, because there was one option we considered and rejected. But so, to give you some of the thinking, with the notion that one of the purposes of the sort of sustainability goals is to create jobs in the community, so to speak. Our goal was to why not just set a numerical target for the field jobs, and then you can aim that target at the semi-skilled or the blue-collar workers, and the current target for the SEU is 88. So you can set the target lower than that. And then when it comes to the non-field jobs or the office jobs, you could just set an expenditure level and say, just 60 to 80% of the personnel funds should flow to district residents. so you're not putting a job count number on that. But there's a lot of issues around complexity and measuring that, some of the things we've talked about now. But there are a couple other models. We talked about earlier this week with, just a day or two ago with Ted, about a similar kind of approach of separating out the types of jobs and using different targets for those. So I think there's a discussion that's moving toward us is to change the conversion factor, look at a way to collect information it's a non-onerous way, or using Joe's terminology, to promote more market penetration, and to come up with a way to be able to count all the jobs that the DCSEU creates.
I mean, this presentation of recommendations according toward the FY14 contract.
Benchmarks.
The benchmark.
Targets. Yeah, targets.
You know, so I'm assuming DDOE is going to be using these recommendations and trying to work something out in time to get the contract with the SEU to have this in, correct? So this isn't a long-term. I mean, I think we're getting the input from the board right now, which I think there is a consensus that this needs to be looked at. But DDOE's got to figure out how to do it, which may be a conversation between you, Joe, and some other key players in order to do it in time for the FY14 contract.
Right.
So I'm not sure that it's a long-term. I'm hoping that it's
So we
not
can
a
move on
long-term
it.
issue.
Or even a big committee.
Right, or a big committee thing, because I think there's agreement around the table, we need to deal with it, but it's a conversation of the DDOE getting comfortable about the recommendations that Jerome says, and also maybe using your field experience, your operational experience.
It gets feedback from different contractors, so you guys can
to
go
get
with
it
it.
into that FY14 contract, correct?
To be honest, this is going to be a long-term issue in the sense that we wouldn't be able to get this done within the next 25 days, so to speak. Because, as Jerome pointed out, there is no established methodology for some of these things that are recommended here. And it really takes time and careful thinking to come up with a methodology that, can be acceptable across the industry, so to speak, or even here to folks in the district. Some of the things that you see that are required here is going way into the details of separating out expenditures for the DCSEU, which can become difficult. One of the things that we have to think about is how do we measure this stuff on the back end? And in building the model, so to speak, it will take some time to figure out all of these pieces. I think it's important for us to understand that as it is, our contract has certain basic requirements in it. There are other layers that are added on by the DCSU for their own comfort in doing businesses with contractors, because our liability essentially stops with the DCSU. So it's a twofold approach. One, in getting this methodology right, and then the second piece you guys were talking about is addressing the amount of compliance requirements, so to speak, that the SEU puts in place. I still think that's up to their prerogative for their level of comfort to do business with contractors. But to get to your point, Bernice, this is not a simple process that we can complete in 25 days, so to speak.
So you're saying that it would not be reflected in the FY14 contract?
I highly doubt it, at least for October 1. We'll probably make an amendment to the contract if we get this done within, the next couple of months. We'll amend the contract, but we won't have it ready for October 1.
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Lance. I mean, part of the issue here is trying to get this right. I mean, right may be the wrong word. Trying to be more reasonable with it, and you can't rush into it. It takes time, because whatever action decision we make, as we've seen from our own experience, creates elaborate. So
with that understanding, what I suggest is that so we get through the other benchmark changes that may affect the FY14 contract, we put with an understanding that we come back at our next meeting to discuss this one and get on to the other ones, because I do think we should have the input from the board on all of the benchmarks.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So you want to take your motion now?
No, we'll just proceed.
Okay.
Could I?
Go ahead. Dan?
Are we talking about green jobs?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I have a big concern about green jobs, and if the board members recall back at the beginning, I pushed hard on this at the very beginning, and I continue to want to push hard on this. I do not see any reason that we should reduce the green jobs at all. It's my view that people can be trained without a lot of training to do most of this work. And I will say that I worked as a blue collar worker for 13 years, and then I discovered I'd see people with white shirts and ties like Larry, and I realized, hell, I better go to college and I can make a lot more money and work less hard.
And you get to serve on the DCSEU board.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, I don't see the need for cutting back green jobs at all.
No,
if anything, they should
no
be.
one's proposing to cut it.
Nobody's proposing.
Well,
That was an
okay.
option that was
No, I get Dan.
Considered,
What
but
we're
not-
saying, what we're looking at is how to measure, not how.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is how do we count green jobs to make
Count
sure
all of
that
them.
so we count all of them.
So that's what I kind of thought. So we would actually have an increased number of green jobs. Am I right?
Well,
The effect would be that.
Statistically, it could turn out that
Yes.
way.
Right.
Yes.
Statistically.
Well, no, wait a minute. I don't want to shell game.
No.
No.
We're not trying to.
But the last point on this are, to what extent is the SEU promoting green jobs, not in its office? I know it's 100%, and it should be. But to what extent are you requiring this or emphasizing it in the contracts that people you award contracts to? Ted, you would know.
We clearly have contract language that gives some preference and promotes green jobs within the language within the contract.
Existing contractors are 85% DC residents, and new contractors are 75%. And then within 6 months, they're supposed to get 85% of their workforce to be DC residents.
These are SEU contracts with suppliers and providers.
Yep.
85%.
80.
And not suppliers, just the ICEs, because we can't.
Well, I didn't mean suppliers. I meant people who are
Yes.
supplying services.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Installers.
I just sort of got
Yeah.
the confusion over time.
Yeah. So Dan, nobody's saying get rid of the green jobs requirement. What we're focusing on is how to count, how to measure.
Okay.
So, okay, the next target is low-income housing, and that's 20% of the at-risk compensation. Our recommendation is to maintain that benchmark in general. The suggested changes are dealing with whether or not to allow solar PV as part of the spending count for the green jobs, for the spending for low-income housing.
And the reason is it's not cost effective?
It's the yields on, currently the yields on solar PV are very, very low.
Although it does meet the social benefit test, doesn't it?
Could beat the social benefit test.
And it's certainly in terms of district law and district policy to cut back, it's a complicated, but I've been sounding a broken record on this. The Distributed Generation Act, the council, and the requirements in that, which are really going to start, it's been plateaued for the last 2 years, and there's a lot of grandfathered contracts. But it's going to start really to hit next year in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And if the requirements are not met, the retail suppliers, everybody's going to have to pay a compliance fee. And it's going to have an impact on rates, electric rates. And there is a huge difference between how much district-based solar PV and solar thermal, and I don't know if you looked at solar thermal, which also counts for RECs, is required by law and is going to be required by law, and how much actually exists. We had a 20 megawatt deficit for 2013.
Okay.
Because of grandfathered contracts, it hasn't resulted in a ultimate compliance fee. But once those grandfathered contracts, and we were start dropping out, which they will start next year, there's going to be a very significant potential impact on ratepayers.
Okay, so let's hold
And
there.
so-
Could you hold right there? Let me ask Lance to advance 2 slides to the benchmark 2, because that's really what partly what we're talking about. Yeah. So go ahead. So, so you're talking about there's going to be a deficit because of the.
There's 240 megawatts of district-based solar PV or solar RECs, not only installed but certified by the commission and for sale and purchased by retail suppliers in the PJM market. That's required by 2023.
Right.
We are now today at 8.1 megawatts in the district, up by 3 megawatts from last year. At the rate of 3 megawatts a year,
We need to be doing 20 megawatts a year minimum.
we will not be, in the next, we're talking 10 years, not even 10 years, 10 years from now, we'll be at 30 megawatts. We'll have 190 megawatt difference, and everyone will be paying the pass-through to the consumers, the equivalent of $500 per megawatt hour in terms of impact on rates. So the district council has passed this law saying this is what has to happen. There has to be this much solar in the district. Now, whether the SEU is the right person to help with that or not, you still have this district law that's in effect that's very aggressive, and it is not anywhere that we can see or anybody can see on a trajectory in terms of solar PV or solar thermal actually being installed in the district. And yet the ratepayers are paying into this fund, and the ratepayers will be paying the alternative compliance fee, which can reach millions of dollars when you get to 2015, 2016. So maybe the economics of the SEU, but I'm really concerned about this disjoint in district policy and district law about solar PV or solar thermal. And so just to say it's not cost effective because of the impact on that particular ratepayer in that particular building. Now, maybe there's another way to do it, but my view is that the district ought to require all new construction to have solar, period.
With the consideration of the societal benefit test,
What's that?
the societal benefit test, mitigate, acknowledging that the energy savings are not cost effective, but mitigated against the societal benefit test to the extent that it is.
Oh, yeah. I think the studies that the DCSEU shows that even though while some programs are not cost effective, overall they meet the societal benefit test. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, that's a fair characteristic. But I do want to point out for this benchmark, it specifically requires improving the energy efficiency of low-income housing.
Yeah.
In the definition of our contract and the way we view energy efficiency, solar PV is not an energy efficiency measure. It does not, when you describe energy efficiency, you're talking about having the same level of consumption using less energy. Installing solar panels is not an energy efficiency measure. So hence it shouldn't be counted as part of the spending here for low-income energy efficiency. We're not saying the SEU can't do PV, but they shouldn't be counting it in the 30% for low-income energy efficiency.
I have a question about this one, because this is one of those expenditure benchmarks where we're tracking their expenditure. What about the market yield sort of number? In other words, affordable, the direct expenditure, affordable housing owners and developers are like any other building owners, commercial building owners. They actually are not low income. Many of them are high income. And so if, let's say, the SEU were able to work with a particular developer or owner, and they put in 50 cents on the dollar for a particular project, does that mean that only the 50 cents on the dollar is going to be counted, or the full dollar?
Pardon the interruption.
For the purposes of our benchmark.
Participants at this time.
What?
If you would like to continue, press star 1 now. For the
For the purpose of this benchmark, only the 50 cents will be counted, because we're counting the expenditure. We're not counting dollars.
I would like to just make a suggestion that perhaps we look at that, because it would actually stretch the dollar and create a larger market for that, and you still are targeting the money towards low income.
Yeah, we would love for them to do that, but at the same time, you wouldn't want to be taking credit for monies that other folks are putting in. So,
Yeah, I don't see why.
think of what we're asking here. We said the benchmark is for them to spend 30% of their budget on low income. If they only spend 10% of their budget and the other 20% comes from someone else, we can't give the SEU credit for spending 30% of their funds.
I want 30% of
No.
the benefit to go to
But
that.
30% the benefit, because maybe if the owner of the building would not have put the, whatever it was in, but the SEU money is the incentive or leverage that makes it possible, or makes them do it, then you have created a benefit that's worth the whole amount.
What I'm seeing
Yep.
is that some of these owners, Lance, I hear you, are interested in this, and when they look at the net present value of the internal rate of return, the DCSEU's contribution, let's say the T12 to T8 program, in that case 70%, makes it so attractive to them getting to do it anyway. So they wouldn't do it otherwise.
Right.
And so to me, because in order, this is not a lot of money that is here, and anything that we can do to promote, a larger pie, is really what makes sense. So perhaps I would just like for us to consider not just an expenditure figure, but a yields figure in terms of how much money is utilized in this. Because you could take, 30% of 20 million, because it's easy math, is $6 million. Let's say they spend $3 million, okay, and the market spends $3 million. Well, that leaves $3 million for other things, to create other jobs and to do other initiatives and programs. I would just like us to consider that.
Yeah, but I want to point out that we would count all of those savings, but we just wouldn't count that $6 million expenditures if the SEU only put in $3 million.
I understand.
And we can get into that discussion because we have thought about going to a savings mark for this particular benchmark. But then it comes back to, what about benchmark number one? Do we want to have each individual savings targets for the various benchmarks? That's why we try to separate this one out as a spending target as opposed to a savings target.
Understood.
So then it becomes an accounting issue in a sense, because if they've only spent $3 million of the $6, then what happens to, and how do you account for the $3 million that was not spent?
Well, in the letter of the contract, they
yield
would not have met the benchmark because you didn't spend the $6 million. But that other $3 million could have been spent on other projects, that created energy savings that helped towards maybe benchmark number one. But when we look at the end of the year, we wouldn't say that they have met the low-income benchmark because you didn't have that 30% expenditure on low-income projects.
What's the bonus? What's the bonus you get on this?
The whole $6 million will be counted towards the yield, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
If you spend-
look at the yield. This.
But what
I don't
happens
see
with
the
them not
problem.
meeting the spending
No,
benchmark?
No, but they can spend the other $3 million on other things.
No, folks. The problem is that the SEU is not going to. This is a performance-based contract, and 20% of the contract is based on them spending the $6 million. So they're going to spend the $6 million, but that might not be the most effective use of the money, because they can take $3 million, the market can put in $3 million, and they can take that $3 million elsewhere. But why are they going to bother? When they're basically, it's like we're giving them multiple. There's too many. It's like too many tails wagging the dog here, I think. In my opinion.
Joe, I want to jump back to your question.
Hold up. Okay, you have a say this still.
Well, I'm actually giving preference to the board's discussion at this point.
Okay,
Thanks.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I can respond to that, the reason they would do that is because they still have to meet the per capita reduction benchmark.
No, I understand. I understand. I get that. I understand.
I think what we're really dealing with is, Joe, we're looking at this as just measuring the expenditure, and are we looking at it as an investment? Where you're giving invest or $3 million. What does it produce? It might produce $10 million in total spending that wouldn't have existed before by private sector spending, and that creates savings of energy. And it's the levering.
It's the market transformation versus just throwing money out into the
It's the investment versus the grant model.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Exactly.
All those are very important to get to benchmark number one. And the SEU can count all of those savings. But what we're saying, they can't count all of those dollars coming in from other folks as
Well, they can't
part
count
of-
them, but we ought to account for them as the result of what you get by that expenditure.
Oh, certainly.
We
That's
count the
accounted
result.
for. When you look at the EM&V reports, it shows clearly the amount of money that was leveraged across the board for the entire portfolio of programs. So it is captured.
Mike?
Larry, I mean, there's a lot of things I can say about PV and renewables, and for the sake of time, I will not have the discussion right now, but I just want to note that the board does not have a renewables representative, and it's really hard for me to imagine you guys having a conversation that can really result where you need to go without having a renewables representative. I think that needs to happen.
Yes. That's an issue we have noted. Did you have something you want to say, Steve?
Yes, so I just want to say that the basic issue with renewables goes back to that original question about leverage and the ability of the SEU to leverage private sector funding to make renewables cost effective. The model that they're using now is not cost effective, but it could easily be very cost effective. It would be 10 times as effective as the model that they're using now. But I think the contract constrains them, they can't do it. So it's back to that very basic question. We could make solar energy expenditures by the DCSEU very cost effective, but it can't happen now.
Cost effective, and does it meet the criteria of energy efficiency savings?
I don't think it belongs in the low income criteria section. I agree with that point. But in terms of the criticism that it's not cost effective now, that could easily be resolved.
Okay.
I don't know if the industry is.
So let's move
move
along.
on to-
We flagged it. We have flagged this as an issue we need to spend more time on.
The largest users, here basically we're recommending that we just drop the term largest and then use the word large, and then get some mutual agreement as who the largest users are. And the DCSU has produced a report on the largest users, which provides a good context. And then we define the benchmark in terms of executed financial agreements with the large users.
Larry, I think he's...
Excuse me.
Ken wants you to put the person who was on the conference call back on.
Oh, someone called in back?
They got disconnected.
Lenora, can you help us with this?
They got disconnected.
She's going to get the number.
Okay.
Was that the solar person?
No, it's
No, it's the VIC
VIC.
It was just emailed and said, or texted, said he got cut off. I think he...
Do you want us just to call him since it was only one person on the line? Just call him?
I just don't know
I have
exactly.
I have the call-in number.
So.
Well, we need to give it to him then, so he can call in.
Oh, and call it here.
Has him do it, but apparently...
Then I guess we have to open up the
Lenore's
phone.
taking care of it.
But if you call into the conference number.
Yeah.
All right, let's get this.
Right. So here is just really a question of coming up with what constitutes the largest, the population of largest users. We'll define the benchmark in terms of executed financial agreements, and then all the DCSEU has to do is we need to track the energy yields from those executed financial agreements.
Seems reasonable.
Your call cannot be complete.
9 and 1.
Any other discussion on that? Let's just move along.
Yeah. Okay, the benchmark 2 gets us back to renewables, and I think we've talked about this quite extensively leading up to it. We suggest that we reformulate the benchmark away from price changes. It's not helpful to have a physical target because it's just too small compared to all the other district goals that
Welcome to the
Commissioner
Conference Calling Center.
Kane mentioned. And then basically just revert to the original tracking indicator used in year one. It's just to ask the DCSU to define and implement a cost-effective program.
Was that, I'm sorry, what was the tracking indicator used in year one?
All they had to do with the tracking indicator was for the DCSU to define and implement a cost-effective program.
Just a cost-effective program, social benefit test.
Parties to the conference, including you.
Well, I think in this instance, we certainly would benefit from having someone at the table with renewable energy experience on the advisory board. Mike was certainly right. I guess, when we were first getting cranked up as an advisory board, I went down to boards and offices about 5 times to try and get enough people on the board to have a quorum. Is that what we need to do? Do we just need to go down to...
Is there a vacancy?
We have 3 vacancies.
3 vacancies.
Solar, or renewable rather. Building construction and low income.
Right.
Well, it's not about going down, there's more or less getting people to apply. They
Yeah.
have to
They identify
interest,
some
they have to
people.
apply for these
We've had
things.
people apply for the solar.
Yeah.
I would think.
For renewable, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because they have some issues down there.
Yeah.
In
For
terms
the
of just the
commission.
administrative aspects of it.
I thought your name was on.
No,
So what
Jermaine
was it, it's building and construction too?
Yes.
is Jermaine lower income? I thought he.
He had held the low income seat, but his position expired
Oh, really?
and didn't renew.
Oh, he chose not to renew it?
Or he might not have been told he needed to. Nobody told me, but I did figure it out eventually.
As of this last meeting.
He's notably not here, so.
Okay.
So I think we do
We
need
have
to
3
do something
vacancies.
about that. Maybe we should talk to the chair about that and see what Mr. Anderson can help us with. Okay.
So, I'm sorry, just repeat them, low income, renewables.
And building construction.
We've never had a renewables person.
No, we did.
We did.
We did.
Allison.
Right.
Oh, right, that's right.
So moving on to benchmark target 3, peak demand. We don't suggest any changes here. We only had the proviso that, talking to some stakeholders, they thought the 2 megawatt reduction was an easy target. But I always warn people, what you think is easy for somebody else may not be easy, but that's neither here nor there. And then we also make the suggestion that the DCSEU actively consider selling capacity to the PJM market.
Oh, good.
Wasn't it an issue? We've had discussion on that, and isn't there an impediment in that you have to be a PJM member to actually bid into the market?
No impediments we can't overcome, but DEIC themselves reported to us that it was several years before they started bidding into their market up north because they wanted to understand, they wanted to have some EM&V reports in, so they had a good solid track record to stand on. And this is based on conversations we had around this very topic, right? And they suggested that it just wait a little bit before we start moving too aggressively on that. And that seemed like a prudent approach.
I just had some recollection that there was an issue with respect to...
There are issues.
There are lots of issues, and the PJM capacity market is very specialized, and you're doing 3 years ahead. It's the auctions. That's the real problem.
That's the real problem.
It's the market.
Who's going to hold the
The
bag?
year-to-year, you can't. You can't. The SEU is currently constructed cannot commit to the 2016 capacity market.
Jerome, did you all
outside of this fiscal year.
Did you all talk about the
And that you better make a firm
ability
commitment.
of the SEU to actually
Yeah. Doesn't work.
ferret out what it could
Does not
claim
work.
as shaving peak demand, or were there just too many confounding variables to actually allow us to measure that accurately?
Oh,
Because PEPCO is doing a lot in this area, of course.
well, the definition is...
Or the other.
I'm sorry.
The definition is the extent at which the DCSU finance programs or co-finance programs lead to a 2 megawatt reduction. That's the definition of the target.
But that's a reduction during certain times of day, I would assume, right? That's peak demand, to my understanding.
Yeah, but it's peak demand on a base. Is that correct, Ted?
I'm not certain about this one. We haven't had a conversation.
Okay.
Peak demand.
Okay.
I can speak to that. This is Dave Cawley.
Hey, Dave.
Yes, it is the peak demand that occurs at the time of system peak. So in fact, all of the peak demand contribution is from the energy efficiency measures that are installed. Each of them have a load profile that show to what extent they contribute to reducing the system peak.
So there's not really any concern then with it being confused with other initiatives that other players are taking. We have a really good accounting for how the SEU's actions have led to peak demand reduction.
How?
Is that right,
You mean
David?
just by, David, you mean just by general efficiency of
The programs they implement.
the programs are implemented? You're assuming
They have a load profile.
they
you
have a
said.
load profile, so it's not a particular program like the ESCOs are doing, or like the direct load control program is doing, where the customer takes an action when peak
No,
time.
it's not. It's not.
This is-
It's not a demand response kind of.
It's not a demand response.
It's like the lighting reduces.
Yeah, but it reduces it all the time, so that it's a carryover effect at peak demand also.
Correct.
It's not specific to peak demand.
Correct. That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a lot more questions about this. I have a little bit of a discomfort with the SCU being held accountable for peak demand because I think, as you might have observed earlier when you were going through kind of the initial comments, that it's a small player. It's a really small player. Now, it's also a legislative requirement. I think that it would behoove us to spend some time on this, or having a subset of people think about this a little bit. I mean, no action for today, but if there are people who would be interested in thinking about this, I'd certainly like for us to explore it further.
All right. So we get to. So all this leads us to benchmark number 1. Here we suggest create a single BTU specification, recognizing that there will still be the spin requirement, and then the DCSEU will be judged on its overall BTU saved, not on therms or kilowatt hours. And need to figure out a way to count the benefits of technical assistance activities. We talked about that, the investment activities, the catalytic investments. But we would put some limit on the benefits that are countable, and to count those catalytic investments, or those things that the SEU incentivizes in the market, we would need an agreed upon methodology to count it, but we would recognize that. That's part 1 of the recommendation.
Looking at converting it to a single BTU specification, what are the other SEUs doing? How do they handle it generally?
Gregory, do you know that?
I didn't hear the question.
How do the other SEUs address the conversion to either a single BTU or disaggregated between gasoline?
The SUs I've seen, they all have disaggregated measures. I've seen one that is converted to a single measure. Although, at Cambridge, their ultimate goal is carbon emissions. So they measure that. Cambridge will look at it more closely, but I think they also have separate measures.
And is it successful?
Good question. Cambridge is struggling. Delaware is struggling. And struggling against their targets. Oregon is doing well. Vermont is doing well, and I have no one from Ohio wants to talk to me, so avoid me. But it seems like from their annual report that they're on track to hit the 3-year targets.
Okay, so, go ahead. No, so, I don't know, I mean, I just out of curiosity, I would love to see, what the targets are and where they are. I know it's a different market and different characteristics. I'm just anxious to see what other SEUs are considering for this particular.
Well, Gregory, is Cambridge rethinking their targets?
Yeah, they actually have a 2-person team assigned to rethink their benchmarks.
And which benchmark is that, or what benchmarks are those?
The energy efficiency goals.
And do you remember what their targets were? Okay.
I should say that the difficulty I have to get my head around this is that we have had in the district, in the last 2 years, a cumulative reduction of 1.3 million megawatt hours. We've had it from and we had a 2.6% reduction in this is actual sales, reported sales, aggregate, from 2011 to 2012. 2.6% reduction, and it was a 2% reduction, I think, from 2010 to 2011. At the same time, we've had a 2% increase in population every year. So things are happening in terms, I don't have gas sales, but in terms of actual sales of electricity, megawatt hours in the district, it's gone down over 2% a year for the last 2 years.
Okay.
So
your issue is the 1% changing the target of the 1%.
Well, what I'm saying, the 1% is obviously, is all of that. All of that obviously isn't attributable to everything the SEU has done. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot happening in terms of reduction in electricity sales in the district. And, we'll see, we don't have 2013 numbers yet. We won't get those till probably the spring when we get the reports. But it's happening. And
but this goes
to
the conversion.
But this is, and of course that's not all, I don't know what gas reduction is or other things, but I'm just saying it's a challenge to sort of separate out what's happening anyway, general awareness, general increase in efficiency of appliances, of buildings, of all kinds of things that are going on, all good stuff.
But the way we sort it out is that the benchmark is set in terms of a 1% reduction, the equivalent of 1% reduction of a 2009 base.
Right.
So you take the 2009 base, you multiply that 1%, and you come up with a megawatt figure.
Yeah.
And that's the target for the DCSEU. So all these other things are moving true. So we established a 2009 base. We said 1% of that, or ramp up to 1%, because it's not at 1% yet. It's a ramp up to 1%. And then you take the percentage, and then the DCSU funded programs or market transformation program have to equal that amount. So so that gets rid of all that stuff that's bouncing around. Population change.
You're not measuring from this year. What the statistics you have just.
I just happen to have the last 2 years. We have them going all the way back. I don't have the 2000.
Back to the 2009.
I don't have the 2009
megawatts.
Yeah,
and that's what they're measuring by. But I see your recommendation being keep the value as it is right now for the FY coming. I'm reading the next page 31.
Next topic.
And then just defer for 1 year the 1%.
Right.
Because it would have been, I guess, for FY 14.
Yes.
It's just not. If you could clarify, what are you saying right there?
So
I thought the 1% was right now. But
no,
it is not.
Right, it's not now because first of all, the SEU didn't get the full $20 million. So it was started out at 7.5 and moved up. So the targets have tracked with the money available, and so with the full $20 million, then you would be accountable, let's say, for the 1% saving. So, in talking to Tetra Tech and other folks, it says it takes about 3 or 4 years for these types of organizations to ramp up. And this is to give it, and since the first year was only like 3 months or something, this gives the DCSEU another year to kind of, with its ramp-up activities. And basically freeze the target at the current level, which is 0.85, and then move to the 1% a year hence. Also, it would give a chance to see how these other changes affect the ability to meet the targets.
Which I support that particular effort, and it's a two-part, change in benchmark target number 1. Both the measurement in terms of therms, and then really what you're saying is keep it the same as far as the percentage until FY14. Keep it the same for 2 years and then go to the 1%.
Exactly. It's another way of saying it. Joe?
So the FY13, if I look at the July report, the megawatt hours and the MCF, that's at a 0.85% level. Here. I got it on my...
No.
Oh,
all right. Thank you.
Yeah, you got all kind of copies.
Thanks, Thank you, sir.
This is the last.
Lenora has one coming up.
Okay. So my question is, the benchmark Yeah, the benchmark minimum.
What page are you on?
I'm on the May report page.
The July 31st?
The July 31st, the July 31st, page 4. It shows the benchmark minimum 103,700 megawatt hours and 272,000 MCFs. That's at the 0.85% level.
Lance, Lance will have to answer that.
The question is,
The benchmark minimum, I'm looking on the report, and Dr. Page is suggesting keeping at the 0.85 level. So are these figures here that are the benchmark minimums, the 103,700 and 272?
yes, those are the minimum requirements for the benchmarks that will trigger an incentive, a bonus payment.
And that's at so that represents a 0.85%?
No, that does not represent the 0.85.
So they're closer than what that represents.
This is less than the total benchmark. Like in some cases, like for the green jobs, for example, if they achieve 80% of the goal, they get 50% of the performance incentive. So each one is set up differently, and that's looking for the actual thing.
No, it's the total goal.
No, that minimum benchmark is not the total goal.
No, I know that. I guess maybe I'm confused. Obviously,
Just
I thought
double
maybe
that
I am.
number. Just double that number, you'll get the total goal. Keep in mind, performance payment kick in if they meet 50%.
I understand. Okay, so they're at 31%. To the end of July, they're at 31% of 50% of the goal.
Exactly.
And on gas, they're at 5% of 50% of the goal.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it
This is where I think
kind of supports the point I was making, that the reductions in electricity use are taking place anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
But the reductions in gas use are going to, or the shift to more efficient things related to gas is going to take more effort.
But this is also where I think that going to a single BTU specification is going to allow us to advance other technologies that could lead to overall energy efficiency and CO2 reductions, such as microturbines in buildings that are co-generating both electricity and heating and cooling. These would be, I think, overall improvements for the energy profile in the district, but yet the current way we track reductions, requiring gas to actually be reduced as being the end all be all, would be a perverse incentive against adopting any of these new technologies.
Right, because in many cases, switching from electricity to gas is more efficient.
That's right. So I very much favor this recommendation.
And then, the last point, to make the overall package reasonable, that would be taking into consideration all the other changes. And then, hopefully with the other changes and freezing the current energy consumption target at 0.85%, this will give the DCSEU a chance to experiment with some things and see whether or not they're able to operate better within all the constraints that we've talked about.
And these changes would not require any legislative amendment because...
The targets. They're not changes to the goals, those are targets. Colin wanted to have
I do have a question on the preceding slide on the methodology. The sub-bullet there, use site-level converters by EIA. Do you know, is that just the standard, like, kilowatt hour to BTU, or does that include like the total fuel cycle?
No, it's not total.
It's not. So this is just site consumption?
Right.
So that in essence could make a heat pump look like it's consuming less energy than a gas furnace, and we just talked about the fact that a gas furnace is more efficient than a heat pump.
Yeah, I mean the whole fuel cycle thing, Colin, we kind of punted on that one.
But then this just keeps things. This doesn't do anything other than we might as well keep it at kilowatt hours and therms.
Because you're not
capturing efficiency.
Right. You're not capturing. And why do you? I mean, EIA uses source. It's not site.
Well, they have two levels. They have two measures.
And you're recommending site level rather than source level.
Right. We'll take another look at that.
Right. I mean, I think
that's a good point.
You're not really accomplishing the goal we're trying to get at.
Okay.
Do that.
All right. Okay. Good point. Thank you. Yes, Dan.
I have a question. This may seem out of place, but I don't think it is. It has to do with low income. I think, I get confused with all these numbers, but I think we're spending 30% on low income. Is
Yes.
that a fact?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Now, we have, or did, a federal low-income weatherization program that has been in existence for many years. Before I go on, does that still exist?
It does, yes.
That's what I thought. How much money are they spending roughly compared to what we are on low income? Just roughly.
Well, the working that budget from our standpoint would be a little under 500,000.
And how much are they and generally providing for this? Probably a lot more.
30% of roughly 17.5 million, which was probably about the
Okay, but what is the federal low-income weatherization program in D.C.? And I guess that's run by DDOE.
Yeah, that's right.
How much are they providing for that, roughly?
A little under 500,000.
Oh, is that all?
500,000.
That's it.
No less than 500.
We received about, what was it, 8 million through the stimulus funding, but that, of course, is gone. So now it's gone back to, like Lance said, under $500,000.
So it's about the same then. Or what has been the energy efficiency gains from that over the years? I would think pretty good. Anyone know that?
It plays a long
We can
time.
get you the exact numbers for that, but it's not as significant as what the SEU is doing, simply because when you look at the formula for which we use to do energy efficiency with homes, take for example a budget of less than 500,000. By the time we take out the necessary pieces for training and for administration and so forth, it allows us to do about 35, 36 homes at about $6,500 a pop. So it's not a significant dent at all. You know, we're barely making an impact with that program.
So there was a bump up with the stimulus money.
Yes.
But
that's gone.
Yeah. So now we're less than 500,000, you know, projected outwards to even go way below that with all the federal cuts that are taking place.
Well, the point of my question is no longer relevant because I thought the feds were spending a lot more, and so I'll just, thanks.
There's also, DHCD have some programs where they're doing public housing upgrades with weatherization, and those, which is low income.
They're
Yes. Yeah, DHCD does have a program that includes more measures outside of what we would call normal energy efficiency upgrades, you know, where they can address roofs and so forth and do some structural repairs.
But they're doing installations sometimes.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases we partner with DHCD too to help stretch our dollars out, you know, so it really helps take a whole house approach to improve the energy efficiency of that home.
In order to stretch the dollars, I would just make the prevent recommendation that perhaps we should look at yield and not expenditures for low income, because you're talking about $2.5 to $3 million of a pool that you can achieve effectiveness, you know, the same effective efficacy with fewer dollars. I'll just put that there. Yeah.
I think this also furthers the question of, I think many recommendations in this report are great and supported by the board, but then what's the next steps? If this isn't going to fit into the next contract, are we on the line to keep exploring if it's never going to go anywhere? Or does that fall 2 years, 3 years down the road?
Oh, it will go. I think the question was, will it be there on October 1? But amendments can be made, you know, the provisions made in the CAE can be made at any time, and they will be retroactive to October 1 whenever we finish having those conversations. So it will happen in FY14.
It will for FY14. And are you expecting to do this in a tiered way or just all
Piece by piece.
all at once? Because there might be some of these recommendations you can put in
right away.
immediately.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So you're going to put some of them in. I think the Queen's Job ones was the
That
only
requires
one that I thought I heard you might have to work longer to get that to happen.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Because we're not doing any major changes to any of the other ones, so.
So the last slide.
Dr. Bates, Dave calling. Do you mind if I ask a question?
Sure, it's Dave. Yes.
Hold on, we have someone on the call.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, the question is, when you looked at the other jurisdictions and their energy programs, did you look at the yields that those programs are achieving with respect to the amount of energy savings and the dollars provided in the program? And if so, how did that influence your recommendations?
No, we didn't research the yield of the different programs. I kind of looked to see what states were doing well, but no, I didn't focus on looking at what were yield numbers for the different programs.
Did you hear that, Dave?
If I heard it correctly, it sounds like you did not look at that.
That's correct.
Not specific yields of different programs.
And so I'm wondering how the conclusion of the 1% goal is considered to be reasonable.
Well,
what we're trying to say, and I think what Dave is trying to say is, and I put this in the least common denominator, layman's terms that I'm able to describe it. It's like saying, can you design a car that gets X number of miles per gallon? How far can you go with energy efficiency per $10,000 invested? And what we've tried to point out in terms of our view of the 1% is, if you've looked at the best energy efficiency companies throughout the United States, per $10,000, how many kilowatts, how many therms are they saving? And we would like for this 1% metric to be measured in that way. And right now, it looks like what you're saying is you did not look at that. That like we almost say that asking us to get 1% savings on $20 million is like asking us to design a car that gets 400 miles per gallon. General Motors and Toyota
But you don't know if that's
figured out a way to stretch the gallon, that far, and that's what we're trying to say is, if there are some standards out there, there is some evidence out there, there's data that would suggest how far you can go, what is reasonably achievable with dollars invested, and then I think as Dr. Page and his team have appropriately pointed out, the pulls and tugs within the contract and the constraints that we understand, with 30% low-income spending, the green job creation piece, 35% CBE spending. I think that was appropriately researched and factored in. What I think Dave is asking here is, have you also talked about just in general, if you took those constraints off the contract, if you took the green jobs, the CBE spend, the low-income spend, if you took that off the contract, could we even get to 1% savings with $20 million? And that's a threshold question.
Oh. What I don't have the numbers offhand, but what's the current target for 1%? What's in terms of megawatt hours for you? What's the current?
I don't know the exact megawatt hour number, but I mean, if you.
Okay, well, how close are you to it now?
Not very close at all.
We're
probably.
Is it 5%?
Well, it's 30% or 50% for electricity. So
that's 15%.
Right. So you're way. I mean, and for gas, you're like 1.2% or something.
I'm up.
Yeah.
So we're really.
Yeah, we're about 34,000 kilowatts, and then 40,000 MCFs.
Right. So that's.
And the minimum for MCS,
34,000
is 272,000.
So 34.
That's 50%. So, I mean, I've been a frequent critic of some of the inefficiencies of the market from a lot of programs, but even with those inefficiencies considered, they're not even close. Let's say they were just a well-oiled machine and humming along. You might see an increase of 20 or 30%, but not the level they're at. They're really, really behind, and I don't think that they're that incompetent.
If you look at Oregon, look at Efficiently Smart Ohio, and if you look at Vermont, their annual reports are showing that they're on target, they're on pace with their 3-year targets. Unless it's hyperbole, they are saying they're going to hit their 3-year targets.
And do
Now,
they have
Delaware-
targets like ours? What percentage?
Yes, they had absolute kilowatt.
Wait, people cannot talk? Oh.
They had absolute kilowatt hours and therm targets. Yes, I mean Delaware and New Jersey and Cambridge were the ones that seemed to be having difficulties, but the other 3 seem to be on top of the efficiency game.
And they had
Let me
similar
express this differently,
targets.
Greg. If those states are spending closer to 5% of utility revenues on energy efficiency programs, and we are sitting here spending 0.5%, or maybe 0.75%, there is a significant disparity in the amount of resources that are being put into these programs, yet still trying to hit that 1% savings goal.
And do you know that?
I think this is a very reasonable point.
Well,
Yeah.
Vermont was spending $44 per ratepayer. I think Oregon was at $24 per ratepayer. So they were, and DC was at the median number. According to ACEE reports, they were at about $12 and something per ratepayer. So there is a different in terms of spend.
I'm wondering if the measurement is the same between those. Are they looking at the entire utility, like electric and gas use for the state? And we're not trying to do that for the SEU goals. We're just taking what the SEU did and the impact of those actions on the demand, right? You're not measuring the overall DC consumption.
Well, no, we are. Well, the target is set at to 2009 base.
But is it measuring overall DC consumption?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is down 2.5% in electricity.
So it sounds like we have another issue here. Yeah,
At this
that's
particular
right.
table. I thought that the consultant's recommendation was sort of a median point by keeping the target at what it is today for another year, as opposed to going along to have the 1% moved up earlier. So I thought that they were moving in a direction that gives you a little bit more flexibility in their recommendation. Am I misunderstanding that?
He's just saying that.
I think you're understanding that correctly. I think
It's just
our
not enough
view would
from
be
their point of view.
that 1% next year, 1% 2014, 2015 is still not attainable within the resources we have allocated to us, capping out at $20 million.
And the goal is not quantified.
Pardon me?
The goal is not quantified. There's not really a strong quantified underpinning for setting a goal at 1%. We don't have good rationale, right?
That's
And
so that's still an
that's
open question.
something we should talk more about.
But
Yeah.
maybe we'll be able to resolve in the
That's right.
upcoming contract is what I'm getting at. At least we kept it the same as what it is, which is not quite 1%. And we understand that that's been a hard target to meet, and we're trying to adjust the other aspects of it. Again, Washington Gas would like us to be moving toward a therm in the FY14 because I think it's a rational way to go. I want you to BTU, I'm sorry. And I'm concerned about that site language that Cohen looked at. It, if we had this problem all
from the beginning.
This is something we had in the beginning. So language is so important to make sure we're really doing what we want to do. So I just ask you to look at that.
I will.
DDOE to look at that as well. So
We'll do
the
that.
difference between site and source is a big difference. We really are, in effect, doing the same thing we were doing if we used the word
Gotcha.
site.
I think that this is just a very complicated discussion point, because if and when, because I do think that we need to look at this in the future, but it's got to be parallel. I mean, if we're talking about reducing the goal, then we need to look at what the consumer contribution is as well. I mean, those are parallel discussions. We may want to do both. We just need to look at that.
Right.
So
we'll take a quick look at that, and we'll Ted, Mark, Dave, you still there? I guess maybe.
We have some information that we'd like you to take a look at because we've compared all the jurisdictions around the country, and the yields that are being asked in D.C. are twice as high on the electric side, and they're close to 7 times as high on the gas side.
Okay.
So we have plenty of information on this. We'd be happy to share.
We're number one.
Is that, I still consider the notion that we really ought to look at the broader look at the ability to leverage these funds and also the ability to have multi-year contracts. Those are 2 huge constraints. But this is I view this as equity. There's market leverage and there's financial leverage. So the $20 million could be $100 million a year. And a lot of
But
these
it still has to be every single year. You're not going to.
Right, so that's what I'm saying, leverage and multi-year. Because this would be a very different discussion on targets and then what's counted and not counted. This is the nation's capital. We ought to have an incredible program that spans, we have tons of buildings in the city. And we shouldn't just view it at 20 million. We need to see how we can make that bigger.
We have an agenda for 2014, actually. With all the issues that we flagged here, I think that will keep us busy for a while. But this was a really useful exercise, and I applaud DDOE for pulling this contract together and teeing up these discussion points.
Larry, are these recommendations that we seem to be coming to some kind of consensus here on, as we talked about it before, about multi-year contracts and leveraging, that when we do our report to the council, I'd recommend that we reflect that this is a concern, that, we'll do our report, include in the report what the SEU did and our view of all of that, but I'm trying to recall what the sections of the report are, but that it seems to me that needs to be communicated also as a concern of the advisory board, that there are this structural problem that we, now 2-3 years down the road still see on the ability to do multi-year contracts and the ability to leverage.
Unless anyone objects, I think we should just read that into the minutes, and we'll just kind of accept that as a recommendation without going through the whole motion process. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good. We have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. We have about 10 minutes left. I don't know if folks had anything else they wanted to discuss, but there were several things that I had listed that would be fairly quick if you all would indulge me. So we do have 3 empty seats. We had a little discussion about that. It's going to make it harder for us to do business with empty seats. What would you suggest we do to try and
encourage people to apply for the...
Well, not only to apply, but also for boards and commissions to do something about it.
I will talk to them about that, and they can't do anything about it. They don't have any applicants or candidates.
They have had applicants. They have had.
I don't know how many they have on hand right now.
I just have spoken to people who have applied.
Okay.
Who actually have been told that no, not suitable.
Okay. And the 3 seats are the low-income seat and
these are mayoral
renewable energy, low-income, and what's that? Building construction. Okay. I'll have a conversation with Mr. Gorman, I believe it is. Daryl Gorman. I'll see him on Monday.
That'd be great. Could we get an update on where things stand with the discussions you've had with the Office of Small Businesses concerning the set aside for CBEs, this 35% set aside? I know there was some discussion about, maybe we need to take into account some of the special conditions of the SEU in setting this on the SEU contract. Has there been any kind of any progress in those discussions?
Somewhat. The SEU submitted their subcontracting plan, which we forwarded to the contracting officer, and she's currently engaging in that process. There's a waiver process that must be followed before we can have any exclusions to certain line items in the SEU's budget. So that's where we are right now, waiting that decision from the contracting officer and DSLB in terms of if it will be allowed.
No, I just wanted to go back to the vacancies. I would recommend that in addition to having the discussion, obviously afterwards, that we actively advertise, either posting it on the SEU website and or DDOE's website, because people may not even be aware that they're vacancies.
Okay, actually, website was another point I wanted to raise too. Our minutes are a little bit behind on the website, but this meeting was not announced on the website. It wasn't listed. And so I'm wondering who has responsibility for like really zeroing in on the website and keeping it current and all that kind of stuff?
We do. I do, and Lenora. We usually send that information down to our IT folks, and they usually get it posted. So we'll see what happened with this particular meeting.
Okay.
And get on. If the last minutes weren't posted, I thought we sent them over. Yes. They don't do them in-house anymore. Oh yeah, apparently there was a change because I know the last time they were able to get it on YouTube, but this time they said over to Octo, which is our chief technology officer. So we went through that.
Okay.
Noted.
So I noted that the solar PV program is inactive now, and well, that's what's in the report. So maybe I'm mistaken, Corinne, but it looked to me, at least in the quarterly report, that the solar PV program is now inactive. But it also looks like you spent the entire budget. So I'm wondering, is that why you don't have anything in the pipeline there? Is it because...
No, we're actively working on some houses right now in Ward 5.
Is that low income?
Yes,
Or okay, so low income. How about the other PV program?
The solar thermal, there are projects ongoing as we speak.
Okay. Well, maybe I misread the report then. Okay, my mistake.
I think you're referring to the quarterly report.
The quarterly report, right.
We've relaunched the solar PV system. So
Oh, you've got something up and running. I see.
So
Okay. All right.
You didn't misread it. It's
All right.
you're not related.
I'm just behind the times. And then last point. I noticed in the quarterly report there was an issue about some of the commercial and institutional customers want set incentive values for doing their projects forward. And I've heard this from the commercial sector also. Instead of having to go through this whole tailored project design, that they would like to see more of a kind of like check the box and I get this incentive for doing this work and bam, 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 it moves right along. So has the SEU decided that that is not an option to move in that direction at all?
For some commercial customers, we do have that option. We do currently, for the last at least year and a half, offered a prescriptive program for commercial customers. But when we
like a menu.
A menu,
There
yes.
is.
There are hundreds of different measures on that list that would qualify, and the current commercial customer could go sign up, install those measures. We would go and inspect them, and then give the rebate on them. And those are set values that we can bring you the whole chart that shows you what the values are and what the rebates are for each measure. We do have that program.
So then in the quarterly report, that was just kind of an observation.
But there's a dollar value limit on that of $10,000.
No. This issue comes up, and I know that Paul's brought it up a lot. The feedback, it's limited to, you've got prescriptive programs that you have energy rebates of 10,000, and then you've got the T12 to TA conversion, which hovers around 300, 400, 500 fixtures, but it eliminates, some of the larger users to come in. And so you go into this custom program, and again, it's been described a lot, I'm sure it's better now, like a black hole. And you don't, something goes in, it takes a while for it to come out. The feedback I got when I brought up the idea of a prescriptive program is that it's complicated, it's not easy to do. But I would like the SU to research that because I think it would motivate the market more. Even if they just said, look, we'll provide a 20% incentive for this activity or a 10% incentive, and then there's a pool limit that once that's hit, it's done. No one can, so the rebates would then be over. I don't know what other states did.
Yeah, so that's also a great point with regards to the limit, because it also needs to be conveyed to the actual users, because you're coming off the heels of a negative reputation when the former program managed by Lockheed Martin hit a wall, and everyone had implemented all these projects with the expectation they'd get a significant amount of rebates, and they didn't. So people are kind of hesitant. So it's all about approving the money beforehand, moving forward, so that people know what to implement before they spend their own capital dollars.
Right, and one of the things that we discussed, I believe, at one of the meetings over at our office was, should we have a prior approval
Exactly.
sort of
Yep.
agreement?
We talked about that
talked
with
about
your
that
presentation.
so that we did not have people's expectations unfulfilled.
Correct.
As we're describing it. And Rich is nodding behind me, and I don't.
It's
It's planning the in-place pre-approval reservation system.
Okay.
FY14 to
Okay, great.
Facilitate eliminating that false expectation.
Okay,
For
great.
lack of a better word.
And I've heard complaints from nonprofit building owners that they can't participate in the commercial program. They own buildings. I think for all intents and purposes, they're identical to the commercial property owners, but because of their nonprofit status, they're not able to participate.
No, that's not true. We worked with Carnegie and plenty of nonprofits.
It may have just been bad information.
Yeah,
that this person
I think
got.
it is.
Yeah.
Because we've worked with nonprofit building owners too. I've directly worked with John
I'll pass that
on
along.
some programs. Yeah.
So it seems like this is getting kind of ironed out. It's something that the SEU is working well with. You're hearing your marketplace, and it's
Constant improvement.
constant improvement.
Not saying we're perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but
So we're going to have prescriptive
getting good
program.
feedback and change.
So the commercial sector is going to have a prescriptive program above the $500 fixture limit and above the $10,000 BER limit.
No, we didn't say that.
Okay, so that's really one of the things that you had brought up.
Yeah, it depends on what you're talking about being implemented. I mean, the T8s is a whole different story. There is a prescriptive path for drives and certain other smaller projects that might fall under what you're talking about. But the custom path is more of what I have a problem with.
Right.
That's the black hole.
That's what I'm talking
That's
about.
the
That needs to be more prescriptive.
Yes.
Okay, and that's not being done.
I don't know.
There- We could have an extended conversation on that, but
Yeah.
the reason why it's so complicated is because every project is different. And if there's a difference between market
Of course.
opportunity and retrofit, and what we can claim savings on, and that affects our yield in the end. Of
Right. Which also goes to the question of, it just seemed like a black hole of, would this have been done without us? Would this have been done without us? And if the answer is not wholeheartedly yes, we don't get the money.
Well, that free ridership is another one of the main
Right.
problems as well. We need to work against free ridership.
And I don't disagree with you, but I think that's where the black hole is coming. It's becoming very much theoretical. Why are you doing this? What's the driving factor between the building owner, the property manager, and then the SEU? And it's not, you're doing this project, you're going to save money, we'll invest our capital to move that forward. It's a circle of, let's talk about why this is happening and who's making the decisions and what's your end goal.
But we're evaluating on that.
Right, and I don't disagree.
So it's
I think
12 o'clock. I think that we can wrap this up, but I sense that we could tee this up for a conversation, that there's some issues here that do need further resolution maybe? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So we've identified, actually 5. I'd love to have an even half dozen. So this actually, I think this would potentially be a good one. I hear about it, and maybe we just should try to tee this up as a conversation to try and get some resolution, some progress, some shared thinking on the subject.
Yeah, the resolution is that you shouldn't necessarily be evaluating.
Okay. There's the resolution.
But this is
We'll tee it up.
6 months now.
Larry, what are your 5, 6?
They are job reporting to the SEU for green jobs, how to measure low income better, expenditure versus investments, issue of load demand. Is this really something we need to be focusing on, except for the fact that the legislation requires it? How to reasonably set consumption and reduction targets, the 1% reduction that we're shooting for. And then the construction, or rather the commercial and institutional customers would like more set incentive values. More, what was the term before you used? Prescriptive, Joe?
Yeah, that's correct.
Prescriptive.
Or revision to the custom.
And then finally, this is kind of a long-standing issue: multi-year funding, leveraging, and how to improve the SEU's capacity to budget for longer projects. So that's the 6 that I identified from today's meeting. And unless there's anything else, we'll adjourn.
Larry, very quick, some of us learned the other day that an important person here received a major promotion, and that person's name is Dr. Teresa Lawrence.
Good choice.
What's your new role? Acting Deputy Director.
I think we should also, we've all individually congratulated Donna, but I think we could send a letter from the board
That'd be great.
congratulating her on her promotion to Vice President of PEPCO for DC, Maryland.
That's great.
I thought it was president.
I think it is president.
Regional. Yeah, it's
Yeah, regional president, right?
Regional, yeah. Regional president,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
Okay, thanks all.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
My pleasure.
You know that. DC Water Board.
Okay, that's a board I want to be on. When I retire.
It's lots of fun, let me tell you.
They've got a lot going on there.
Oh, they have a ton. It's a lot of stuff going on.
Did you know that this guy,
DC Water Board. That's why I replaced him.
Yeah, I've been having some conversations with him. He's got some interesting ideas about waste management and energy efficiency.
He was well respected. Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah, that's a big deal.